The rain fell sideways that November evening, the kind of rain that seemed to erase the difference between sky and earth. On the edge of Millbrook, a small town in eastern Wyoming, where people minded their own business and strangers weren't particularly welcome, Marcus Webb stood outside the feed store, loading supplies into the bed of his truck. He was a man of few words, the kind who'd learned long ago that silence was safer than speech, that solitude was cleaner than connection. He'd built a life around that principle for 43 years, and it had served him well enough. He didn't see her at first. She was small, barely visible in the shadows cast by the storefront, huddled against the brick wall like she was trying to become part of it. But then, as he turned to grab another bag of grain, he heard it. Her voice so small it barely qualified as a whisper. "Sir, can I hide under your coat?" Marcus froze. Not because of the question itself, but because of what he heard beneath it. Fear, not the ordinary fear of a child who'd gotten lost or scared of the dark. This was different. This was the kind of fear that came from knowing something was genuinely wrong. This was survival. He turned slowly and saw her for the first time. A girl, couldn't have been more than 9 or 10, with dark hair plastered to her face by rain, wearing a thin jacket that belonged on a summer day, not a freezing November night. Her eyes were wide, searching his face for something, mercy, probably, or safety. Her lips were turning blue. "Please," she whispered, "he's looking for me. Please don't let him find me." In that single moment, Marcus Webb's carefully constructed life of isolation and silence cracked wide open. And nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same again. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The thing people didn't understand about silence was that it wasn't empty. Marcus Webb had spent 43 years learning that silence was full of things: regrets, losses, the weight of choices made and unmade. Silence was a living thing if you knew how to listen to it. He lived 15 miles outside of Millbrook proper, on a property that had belonged to his family for 3 generations, though family was a word that didn't quite fit anymore. The ranch wasn't large, just enough acreage to run a small cattle operation, enough work to fill the hours and keep his mind from wandering to places it shouldn't go. The house was old, built in 1967 by his father, maintained but never modernized. Marcus preferred it that way. Modern things required maintenance, required attention. The old house just required respect, and that was easier to give. He'd inherited the property at 28, right after his mother died. She'd been the last thread connecting him to the world, the last person who could talk him down from his silences. After she passed, something shifted. He stopped trying so hard to engage, stopped forcing conversations, stopped pretending he was anything other than a man more comfortable with animals than people. And gradually people stopped trying. The townsfolk of Millbrook had learned to accept him as he was. Marcus Webb, the quiet rancher who kept to himself, paid his bills, didn't cause trouble, and wasn't particularly interested in being part of the community. He preferred it that way, or at least he'd told himself he did. There had been a woman once, years ago. Her name was Jennifer. She'd moved to Millbrook when Marcus was 35, opened a small veterinary clinic, and somehow she'd looked past his silences and seen something worth knowing. She'd been persistent in the gentle way of people who truly believed connection was worth the effort. For 2 years, they'd had something, not passionate, not loud, but steady, real. Marcus had almost believed he might be capable of normal after all. Then Jennifer had gotten sick. Cancer. Fast-moving, brutal, unforgiving. Marcus had spent 6 months watching her fade, and when she died, he'd made a silent vow: never again. Never again would he let someone matter that much. Never again would he set himself up for that kind of loss. So he'd gone back to his silences, deepened them, made them a fortress. The ranch had become his sanctuary. The cattle didn't require conversation. The fences didn't judge his moods. The weather didn't care if he spoke or not. He worked from dawn until the light gave out, and in the evenings he sat on his porch with a cup of coffee that was usually cold by the time he finished it, watching the mountains turn purple in the failing light. This was his life. This was what he'd chosen, and he'd made peace with it, or so he thought. The trip into town that November evening had been routine. He needed feed for the cattle, nails for fence repair, ammunition for the rifle he used to manage predators. These were the things that necessitated leaving his property. Brief incursions into civilization that he conducted as efficiently as possible. Get in, get what he needed, get out. No conversations beyond what was necessary. No eye contact. No complications. The feed store was owned by a man named Robert Chen, who'd bought the place 10 years ago. Robert was one of the few people in Millbrook who didn't seem bothered by Marcus's silences. He'd learned early on that Marcus didn't want small talk, so he just rang up purchases and sent customers on their way. It was a transaction-based relationship, which suited Marcus perfectly. Marcus had gathered his supplies, 3 bags of cattle feed, 2 boxes of nails, a case of ammunition, and was loading them into his truck when the weather shifted. The wind picked up, and the rain that had been threatening all afternoon suddenly became serious. Not a gentle November rain, but the kind that came with an edge, that promised sleet or snow was waiting in the wings. He was adjusting the final bag when he heard the voice. So small he almost missed it. So fragile it seemed impossible it belonged in a physical body. "Sir, can I hide under your coat?" Marcus turned, and that's when everything changed. The girl was standing at the edge of the storefront, pressed against the brick wall like she was trying to merge with it. She was small, so impossibly small, and soaked through. Her lips had a blue-gray quality that spoke to prolonged exposure to cold. Her eyes were the most striking thing about her, though. They were alert in a way that had nothing to do with childhood curiosity and everything to do with survival instinct. They were the eyes of someone who'd learned to read danger in the spaces between words. "Please," she whispered. "He's looking for me. Please don't let him find me." Marcus's first instinct was to step back, to tell her she needed to find an adult, to report to the police station, to do anything that didn't involve him. He had no experience with children. He had no experience with crisis. He had no experience with anything that required him to be anything other than a man who worked hard and kept to himself. His second instinct, the one that surprised him and came from somewhere buried so deep he'd thought it was dead, was to do exactly what she'd asked. "Come here," he said quietly, and his voice sounded strange after so many hours of silence, rough, unused. Quickly, she didn't hesitate. She moved toward him with the kind of desperation that spoke to real fear, real danger. Without thinking much about it, Marcus unbuttoned his heavy work coat, a Carhartt in faded tan, worn thin by years of Wyoming weather, and opened it wide. The girl ducked underneath, pressing herself against his chest, and he wrapped the coat around her, creating a small cave of relative warmth. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Lily," she whispered. "My name is Lily." "Okay, Lily, I'm Marcus. We're going to get you somewhere warm, somewhere safe. Can you do that?" She nodded, barely visible beneath the coat. He was supposed to be asleep. "I thought I could get away, but he woke up and he saw me and he started yelling. I ran. I didn't know where to go." Marcus didn't ask who he was, not yet. What mattered in this moment was the immediate physical need. The girl was hypothermic on her way to serious cold exposure. Everything else could wait. He guided her toward the truck, keeping the coat around her, trying to shield her from the worst of the rain and wind. Robert emerged from the feed store, took one look at the situation, and without asking any questions, came out to help load the remaining supplies quickly. "That's not your daughter," Robert observed. "It wasn't a question." "No," Marcus said. "She needs shelter." Robert nodded once. "Call me if you need anything." It was the kind of response that Marcus appreciated. No judgment, no demands for explanation, just acceptance that something difficult was happening, and he'd handle it as he saw fit. This was how small-town people were supposed to operate, though it rarely worked that way. Most people wanted answers. Most people wanted to know. Robert just wanted to know Marcus had what he needed. "I will," Marcus said. He got Lily into the truck's cab, cranked the heat up, and pulled out of town, heading toward the ranch. The girl sat huddled against the passenger door, wrapped in his coat, and began to shake in earnest now that she was in a warm space. This was good. Shaking meant her body was trying to rewarm itself. But she was also coming down from adrenaline and the reality of what she'd done, running, hiding, trusting a stranger, was probably starting to settle in. "Where are we going?" she asked, her teeth chattering. "My ranch," Marcus said. "It's about 20 minutes from town. We'll get you dry, get you warm. Then we'll figure out what comes next. You're not going to take me back?" There was such hope and fear mixed together in those 4 words. "No," Marcus said. "Not tonight. Tonight, you're going to be safe." It was a promise he had no idea how to keep, made by a man who'd spent the last 15 years ensuring he had no responsibility for anyone but himself. But as he drove through the rain-soaked darkness, with a small, wet, terrified girl wrapped in his coat in the seat beside him, Marcus Webb realized that his carefully constructed life of silence and solitude had just collided with something it couldn't absorb. Someone needed him. Truly needed him. Not in the abstract way people always needed each other, but in the specific, immediate, undeniable way that made everything else irrelevant. And despite all his best efforts to remain untouched by the world, Marcus found he couldn't say no. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The ranch house felt different that night. Not because it had changed in any physical way, but because it contained someone other than Marcus for the first time in years. The fluorescent glow of the kitchen seemed harsher somehow. The worn linoleum more visible. The single coffee mug sitting in the dish rack more conspicuously lonely. Marcus guided Lily inside, keeping one hand on her shoulder. She was smaller than he'd realized in the truck, maybe 70 pounds if that. The wet clothes hung on her frame like fabric on a scarecrow. Her teeth were still chattering despite the truck's heat and the warm coat wrapped around her. "Bathroom first," he said. "We need to get you dry and warm. There are towels in the linen closet. Run the shower as warm as you can stand it, but not scalding. Stay in there until you stop shaking. Can you do that?" Lily nodded but hesitated. "Will you be here when I come out?" It was such a small question, but it contained everything. She needed to know he wasn't going to disappear, wasn't going to call someone to come get her, wasn't going to abandon her the moment she was out of sight. "I'll be here," Marcus said. "I'll be in the kitchen. I'll have warm clothes for you and something hot to eat, okay?" She nodded, and he directed her down the hallway to the bathroom. He heard the door close, heard the shower start. The sound of water running was unfamiliar in this house. Another sign of the before and after that had just split his life in half. Marcus moved through the house with purpose, pushing past the strangeness of it all. He found a pair of sweatpants and a t-shirt that would be enormous on Lily, but would work. He set them on the bathroom counter and then moved to the kitchen, where he began heating water for tea. He didn't have a lot of experience with children's food. His kitchen contained mostly what he cooked for himself. Beef, vegetables, bread. Functional, not particularly welcoming. He found some chicken broth in the cupboard and began heating it, adding noodles and some of the frozen vegetables he kept on hand. Simple, warm, something to put calories back into a body that clearly hadn't been fed well in recent days. As he worked, his mind moved through the practical implications of what had just happened. A child had come to him seeking shelter. A child was hiding in his shower. A child was about to become his responsibility, at least for tonight. Possibly longer. The legal implications were enormous. He had no guardianship, no authority. If someone came looking for her, he had no right to keep her. But the alternative, turning her out into the rain, sending her back to wherever she'd come from, was impossible. The fear in her eyes had been too real, the desperation too genuine. He would figure it out. He had to. When Lily emerged from the bathroom 20 minutes later, she was swimming in the oversized clothes, but she was dry, and the blue-grey quality had faded from her lips. Her hair, clean now and still damp, fell straight down her back. Without the dirt and rain, she looked even younger than he'd first thought. Maybe 8, possibly 9. Definitely not 10. Sit, Marcus said, gesturing to the kitchen table. He set the bowl of broth and noodles in front of her, along with a glass of milk. Eat slowly. Your stomach might be sensitive after... He paused, not wanting to assume. After whatever happened, Lily picked up the spoon and began eating methodically, like someone following instructions rather than actually tasting the food. But she kept eating, which was the important part. Marcus poured himself coffee and sat across from her, maintaining the kind of distance that felt safe. Not hostile, but not intrusive. They sat in silence for several minutes. Lily finished half the bowl before she pushed it away, her stomach apparently deciding it had had enough. She reached for the milk and drank it slowly. "Can I ask you some questions?" Marcus said finally. Lily's entire body tensed. It was subtle, but he caught it. The way her shoulders drew up, the way her breathing changed. This was a child who'd learned to fear questions. "I'm not going to call anyone," Marcus said, choosing his words carefully. "Not yet. I just need to understand what's happening so I can help you properly." "Can you tell me?" Lily was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Marcus thought she might not answer. But then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, the words coming out in fragments like she was trying to piece together something she didn't fully understand herself. "My mom got sick," Lily said. "Really sick, like hospital sick. The doctors said she needed help at home after, and there was this man. His name is David. He said he could help. He said he'd take care of us. He moved in." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He knew where this was going, and he didn't like any of the possible destinations. "At first he was nice," Lily continued. "He brought us food. He helped Mum. But then Mum got worse, and she had to go back to the hospital, and she's been there a long time. David said I had to stay with him because Mum couldn't pay the bills anymore, and he was helping. He said if I told anyone they'd put me in foster care, and I'd never see Mum again." "Where is your mom now?" Marcus asked quietly. "Millbrook County Hospital." "In the psychiatric ward." Lily's voice broke slightly. "They said she had a breakdown. After she got sick and everything got hard. She tried to hurt herself, so they said she has to stay longer." Marcus processed this information. A mother incapacitated, a child vulnerable, a man with access and proximity. The story was distressingly familiar, and it made his blood run cold. "Did David hurt you?" Marcus asked, and it took all his strength to ask it calmly, to not let the anger he felt immediately rise up in his voice. "Not like that," Lily said, and Marcus felt a small measure of relief that was immediately complicated by the fact that she seemed to understand the distinction that she thought to clarify. He locked me in my room sometimes. He said mean things. He said nobody wanted me. He said Mom didn't want me either, that I was too much trouble, that I should be grateful he was keeping me. He made me do chores, a lot of chores. And he said if I tried to leave, he'd make sure I never found Mom." "How long have you been living with him?" 3 months, Lily said. "Ever since Mom got taken to the hospital. He knew her from before. They worked together or something, and he just showed up, and he wouldn't leave." Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking out at the dark ranch. The rain had stopped, but the world beyond the glass was still wet, still cold, still hostile. He pressed his hand against the window frame, feeling the cold radiating from the glass, trying to center himself. A child, a terrified, hungry, traumatized child. A mother hospitalized and vulnerable. A predatory man positioning himself as the only available caregiver. The setup was textbook. The stakes were immediate and real. "What made you run tonight?" Marcus asked, turning back to face her. He was drinking, Lily said. He does that sometimes, and he gets meaner. And tonight he was talking about sending me away, about how I was too expensive, how Mom wouldn't come back anyway. And he left his bedroom door open and he fell asleep, and I couldn't stay anymore. I grabbed my jacket and I just ran. I ran until I couldn't run anymore, and then I saw you and I didn't know what else to do. Marcus nodded slowly. Okay, Lily, I need you to know something. You did the right thing. You were smart to run. You were smart to ask for help. What happened? None of that was your fault. The things David said, the way he treated you, the situation with your mom, none of that is because of anything you did. You understand? Lily's eyes filled with tears. But Mom's alone. And David's going to be mad that I left. He's going to do something. Let me worry about David, Marcus said, and he meant it. Right now, we're going to focus on getting you safe and getting your mom the help she needs. Can you do that? Lily nodded, and Marcus could see the exhaustion hitting her now. The physical tiredness that came after adrenaline and fear wore off. Her eyelids were drooping. Come on, he said. Let's get you to bed. We can figure out the rest tomorrow. He led her to the spare room, a space he rarely used, containing a double bed with a quilt his mother had made decades ago. He pulled back the covers, and Lily climbed in, curling onto her side like she was trying to make herself small. Marcus pulled the quilt over her and stepped back. Will you leave the door open? Lily asked sleepily. Yes, Marcus said. I'll leave it open and I'll leave the hallway light on. If you need anything, you call out and I'll hear you. Okay? Okay. Lily's eyes were already closing. Thank you for helping me. Marcus didn't answer. He just stood there in the doorway, watching a child sleep in his house, thinking about all the ways his carefully ordered life was about to become infinitely more complicated. Thinking about hospital records and social services and the legal maze of protecting a child who wasn't his own. Thinking about facing down a man named David and making sure he understood, in whatever way necessary, that he'd never touch this child again. For 15 years, Marcus had cultivated silence because he believed it protected him from pain. But as he stood in that doorway, watching Lily sleep, he realized that silence didn't protect anything. It just meant you were alone when the real trials came. And they always came eventually. They always did. He turned off the hallway light, left it cracked open just enough for her to see the bathroom across the hall, and went to his own room. He didn't sleep. He spent the night on his bed, fully clothed, thinking about what came next. Thinking about the steps he'd need to take. Thinking about how a man who'd spent half his life avoiding responsibility was now going to have to become responsible for someone else's entire future. By the time the sun came up over the Wyoming mountains, Marcus had made his decisions, and they terrified him. But they were the right ones, and that was enough. Marcus made the first call at 7 in the morning before Lily woke up. He sat in his truck, parked a quarter-mile from the house, where there was barely enough cell signal to function, and dialed the number for Millbrook County Hospital. His voice was rough from disuse as he explained to the receptionist that he needed to speak with someone in the psychiatric ward about a patient named Sandra Mitchell. "Can I ask the nature of your inquiry?" the receptionist asked. "I'm calling about her daughter," Marcus said. "I need to inform her that the child is safe, and I need information about her condition and visiting hours." It took 4 transfers and nearly 20 minutes. But eventually, Marcus was connected to a social worker named Patricia Chen, who worked in the psychiatric ward. She had a cautious voice, the kind that came from years of protecting patient privacy while trying to help people who genuinely needed information. "I can't give you specific medical information," Patricia explained, "but I can tell you that Sandra has been a patient here for 6 weeks. She's stabilized considerably and is scheduled for discharge in approximately 3 weeks, provided her condition continues to improve." However, there's a significant issue regarding her daughter's placement. What issue? Marcus asked, though he suspected he knew. The individual listed as emergency contact, David Mercer, has been cleared by our system as appropriate to assume temporary guardianship of the daughter during Sandra's hospitalization. However, there have been no visits from the daughter since admission and no communication between Sandra and the child. When we've asked Mr. Mercer about this, he's indicated the daughter is struggling with the situation and needs space. Sandra doesn't believe this. She's been increasingly agitated about her daughter's welfare. Marcus felt anger move through him like ice water. David Mercer. The name clicked into place with the information Lily had given him. A man who'd positioned himself as the caregiver while systematically isolating a child from her incapacitated mother. Standard predatory behavior executed with surgical precision. I have the daughter, Marcus said flatly. She came to me yesterday evening in distress. She disclosed a pattern of emotional abuse and neglect by Mr. Mercer. I need to know what the appropriate legal process is to report this. There was a pause on the line. Marcus could almost hear Patricia recalibrating, shifting from cautious social worker to crisis management mode. You have the child, Patricia asked carefully. And she disclosed abuse? Yes, emotional abuse, isolation, intimidation. Not sexual abuse, but psychological mistreatment that rises to the level of harm. Okay, Patricia said. Okay, here's what needs to happen. First, you need to contact Child Protective Services immediately. Give them the information about the abuse and your location. They'll need to conduct an assessment and take custody, temporary custody of the child. What I can tell you, off the record, is that we're going to immediately flag Mr. Mercer's guardianship status. If what you're describing is accurate, he's already violated the terms of his arrangement by preventing contact between Sandra and her daughter. That alone is a violation. Will she go into foster care? Marcus asked. Possibly temporarily while we investigate and while Sandra completes her treatment. But Sandra has been asking about her daughter constantly. Once she knows the daughter is safe, and once the abuse allegations are documented, the priority will be reunification as soon as Sandra is stable enough to provide care. She's been making excellent progress. I think discharge in 3 weeks is realistic. 3 weeks. Lily would be in the system for 3 weeks, possibly longer, while the investigation unfolded and bureaucracy did its work. 3 weeks of uncertainty for a child who'd already experienced far too much of it. If I keep her here temporarily, until you can send someone out, Marcus said, would that be acceptable? You'd need to call CPS, Patricia said carefully. They're the ones who make those determinations. But I'll call them myself and let them know you're a credible reporter and a willing temporary placement. That might help facilitate faster response. What's your name? Marcus Webb. Okay, Marcus. Hang tight. I'm going to make some calls on my end. You call CPS right now. Tell them everything. And Marcus, you did the right thing calling. After Patricia hung up, Marcus sat in the truck for a long moment processing. The machinery of intervention was now in motion. Once he made the next call, there was no taking it back. Lily would become part of a system, subject to assessments and investigations and the glacially slow machinery of child protection services. She might be removed from his house within hours. There was no guarantee things would go smoothly, but the alternative, leaving her in David Mercer's hands, or sending her out into the world without protection, was unthinkable. Marcus called the Wyoming Department of Family Services and reported the suspected abuse. The woman who took his report was professional and efficient. Yes, she said, they could send someone out to his property within 2 hours to conduct an initial assessment. In the meantime, he was to keep Lily safe and comfortable. She was to have access to water and food. She was not to be questioned further about her experiences. That would happen during the official interview. 2 hours. Marcus ended the call and sat in the silence of his truck, watching the sun climb higher over the mountains. 2 hours to prepare Lily for the fact that her life was about to change again. 2 hours to explain that while he was trying to help her, helping her meant handing her over to a system she'd never encountered before. He drove back to the house, slowly, giving himself time to think about how to approach the conversation. But when he walked inside, he found Lily already awake, standing in the kitchen in the oversized clothes from the night before, looking at the coffee maker like it was a puzzle she was trying to solve. "I made coffee," she said quietly, as if she'd overstepped somehow. "I remembered my mom used to make it." "I thought maybe you'd want some." Marcus felt something in his chest shift. This child, who'd been neglected and mistreated, had woken up in a strange house, and her first instinct had been to do something kind, something helpful. "Coffee sounds good," he said. "Thank you." He poured 2 cups, black for himself, and he added milk and honey to one for Lily, which she sipped carefully, trying to seem more grown up than she was. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd eaten broth the night before, and Marcus tried to find the right words. "I called your mum's hospital this morning," he said finally, "and I called the people whose job it is to protect children when they're being hurt. They're sending someone here to help us, to make sure you're safe." Lily's entire body tensed. "Are they going to take me back to David?" "No," Marcus said firmly. "No. They're going to talk to you about what happened, and then they're going to make sure you're in a safe place. It might be in foster care temporarily, while your mom finishes getting better. But the social worker I talked to said your mom has been asking about you constantly. She's going to be thrilled to know you're safe. But David said..." "David lied," Marcus cut her off, not unkindly. "David said a lot of things that weren't true because he wanted to control you. What's true is that your mom loves you. What's true is that there are people whose job it is to help kids like you. What's true is that you did exactly the right thing by asking for help." Lily's lip wobbled. "I'm scared, I know," Marcus said. "But I'm going to stay right here while they talk to you. You're not going to be alone. And whatever happens, I'm going to make sure that you know you did nothing wrong. That none of this was your fault. That you were brave yesterday, and you need to keep being brave today. Can you do that?" Lily nodded, but she was trembling slightly. Marcus did something he hadn't done in a long time. He reached across the table and took her small hand in his, not as a threat or a demand, just as a promise. A man who'd spent years believing connection was too painful to maintain, making a simple gesture of solidarity with a child who needed to know she wasn't alone. When the CPS caseworker arrived 90 minutes later, a woman named Susan Martinez, with a kind face and a clipboard, Lily was still holding his hand. The gesture was innocent, but it communicated everything about what had happened between them in less than 24 hours. A bond had formed. Not the kind that could be easily severed by bureaucratic process. Susan conducted her interview with remarkable sensitivity, talking to Lily in the living room while Marcus remained visible in the kitchen, close enough to provide security without hovering. He heard Lily's small voice describing the locked doors, the harsh words, the isolation from her mother. He heard her voice strengthen as she realized, with each question answered, that an adult was actually listening, actually believing her, actually taking her seriously. When the interview concluded, Susan came to speak with Marcus privately. "Based on what Lily has disclosed, and based on what I can observe about her current condition and your home environment, I'm recommending temporary placement with you pending full investigation," Susan said. "I'll need to do a home study, which I can complete today. In the meantime, Lily remains in your care as an informal emergency placement. CPS will take custody officially, but you'll serve as the placement provider. Does that work for you?" Marcus felt the weight of what he was agreeing to settle onto his shoulders. This was real now, concrete, legal. He was becoming responsible for a child in the eyes of the state. "Yes," he said, "that works. I also want to tell you, Susan added quietly, that what you did, removing a child from an unsafe situation and immediately reporting it, that's exactly what we need more people to do. Not everyone would have made that call. Not everyone would have kept her safe and then voluntarily handed her to the system. You did good here. After Susan left, having completed her home study and filed her preliminary reports, the house felt different again. Lily was still there, but now her presence was official, documented, part of a plan that extended beyond just Marcus and into the machinery of child welfare systems and family reunification protocols. That evening, Marcus received a call from Patricia Chen at the hospital. "I spoke with Sandra," Patricia said. "Her daughter is safe." She cried, a lot, but good cries, the kind that mean relief. "She's doing better already, just knowing her daughter is alive and protected. I told her about you. I didn't give specifics, but I told her that a good man was keeping her daughter safe. She wanted me to thank you." After the call ended, Marcus sat on his porch in the fading light, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling into evening. Somewhere inside, Lily was reading a book he'd given her, eating apple slices and peanut butter, slowly learning that adults could be trustworthy, that help could come from unexpected places, that sometimes strangers saw you clearly and decided to stay. Marcus had spent 43 years believing silence was safety, but he was learning very quickly that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was break your silence and let someone else's story become part of yours. 2 weeks into Lily's stay at the ranch, Marcus noticed something he hadn't expected. She was happy, not constantly, not without complications, but genuinely happy in moments. She'd laugh at something she saw, a calf stumbling through the pasture, a bird that flew into the fence and shook itself off indignantly, and the sound was pure and uncomplicated. It was the laugh of a child who'd temporarily forgotten to be afraid. The routine they'd developed had a rhythm to it. Marcus would wake before dawn and handle the ranch work, feeding cattle, mending fences, checking water troughs. Lily would emerge around 7, still in the oversized clothes, because they hadn't been to town for proper fitting alternatives. She'd make coffee the way she'd learned, and they'd eat breakfast together. Simple things: eggs, toast, fruit from the pantry. Conversation that moved slowly, carefully, like they were both learning a new language. After breakfast, Lily did schoolwork. Susan Martinez had coordinated with her school district and materials had arrived at the ranch. Lily worked through math and reading assignments at the kitchen table, while Marcus moved through the house, doing repairs and maintenance. He'd find excuses to stay in the kitchen, cleaning the refrigerator, organizing cabinets, anything that kept him in her vicinity without hovering. One afternoon, Marcus found Lily struggling with a math problem. She was frowning at the paper, pencil poised, clearly frustrated. "What's the problem?" Marcus asked, though he meant it literally. Lily showed him. A word problem, about 2 trains leaving stations at different times, calculating when they'd meet. Marcus wasn't particularly good at math, but he sat down and worked through it with her methodically, showing her the logic rather than just giving her the answer. Lily's face cleared as she understood, and she worked through 2 more problems on her own before triumphantly circling her final answer. "I got it," she said, looking up at him with a smile. "You did," Marcus confirmed. "You figured it out." It was a small victory, but Lily held it like it was enormous. Because in her world, victories had been scarce. Every win, no matter how minor, was something to treasure. The evenings were different. After schoolwork was finished and chores were done, they had time that belonged only to them. Lily would read while Marcus sat nearby, often whittling small wooden shapes, something his father had taught him decades ago and he'd abandoned for years. A horse, a bird, a simple house. Nothing elaborate, just the meditative practice of shaping wood, watching it become something it hadn't been before. Sometimes Lily asked him questions. about his life, his family, his ranch. Marcus found himself answering things he'd never discussed with anyone. How his mother had died when he was 28. How Jennifer had broken his heart in ways he hadn't thought possible. How loneliness had felt safer than risking connection. He didn't tell her everything. Some things were still too raw, but he told her enough that she understood. That he'd spent years being alone, not because he had to, but because he'd convinced himself it was the only way to survive. "I'm glad you didn't keep being alone," Lily said one evening, her voice small in the quiet house. "I'm glad you were there when I needed you." Marcus set down his whittling knife. "I'm glad I was there too." But underneath the growing contentment was a clock ticking. Sandra Mitchell's discharge date approached steadily, moving closer with each passing day. The investigation into David Mercer had been completed. His guardianship had been officially revoked, and there was discussion of potential criminal charges pending interview statements and additional evidence gathering. But the overwhelming priority now was family reunification. Sandra was stabilized. Sandra was capable. Sandra was Lily's mother, and the system was designed to return children to their biological parents whenever possible. 3 days before Sandra's discharge, Susan Martinez called. "Sandra's been asking a lot of questions about you," Susan said. "About whether you'd be open to her meeting with Lily before she takes her home. She wants to do it somewhere neutral, to make sure Lily feels safe. Would you be willing to bring Lily to my office in Millbrook? I can facilitate a first meeting there." Marcus felt something cold move through him. He'd known this was coming. Intellectually, he'd prepared himself for it. But preparation and reality were very different things. "When?" he asked. "Tomorrow afternoon, if possible." 2 o'clock. "Okay," Marcus said. "We'll be there." After he hung up, Marcus sat in silence for a long time. Then he went to find Lily, who was reading on the porch. She looked up when he approached, and he could see the moment her face shifted when she registered that something had changed. "Your mom is getting out of the hospital," Marcus said, sitting beside her. "Tomorrow. And she wants to see you." Lily's book fell from her hands. Her face went through a series of expressions. Joy, fear, confusion, hope. All of it at once. Is she going to be okay?" Lily asked. "She's going to be better," Marcus said. "She still has some healing to do, but she's getting stronger. And she's been asking about you constantly. She's been waiting to see you. Am I going back with her?" Lily's voice was very small. This was the question Marcus had been dreading. The question that acknowledged what they'd both been avoiding. That this wasn't forever. That the time was coming to an end. "Eventually," Marcus said carefully. "But you'll have time with her first. You'll get to know her while she's getting stronger, and we'll figure out what's best for you." "Okay?" That night, neither of them slept well. Marcus could hear Lily moving around in the spare room, getting up to go to the bathroom, getting back in bed, getting up again. Her mind was racing. Everything she'd built in this house, the safety, the routine, the knowledge that she had a place where she belonged, was about to be tested by the return of her biological mother. The next morning, Marcus helped Lily pick out an outfit. The school district had sent a box of clothing that fit her properly, donated items that were close to her size. She chose a blue sweater and jeans, then changed her mind 3 times. Finally, she settled on the blue sweater with a pair of grey pants, and she sat on the bathroom counter while Marcus helped her brush her hair. "Will she recognize me?" Lily asked suddenly. "Your mom?" Marcus asked. "Of course she will. But I've changed," Lily said. "I'm different than when I last saw her." "People change," Marcus said. "But mothers see the core of who their children are. That doesn't change." They drove to Millbrook in near silence, the truck carrying them down the mountain road toward a future that felt both inevitable and terrifying. Susan Martinez's office was in a small professional building next to the courthouse. The waiting room was bland, beige walls, comfortable chairs, the kind of space designed to feel safe but impersonal. Susan greeted them and led them to a small conference room. There was a table, some chairs, a box of tissues prominently displayed. It was the setting for difficult conversations, for reunions, for the messy work of putting broken families back together. "Sandra will be here in just a moment," Susan said. "Lily, your mum is very nervous. She's been worried about you, and she's been working really hard to get better so she could see you again. When she comes in, I want you to know that whatever you're feeling is okay. Happy, scared, confused, all of it is okay. I'm going to be right here the whole time, and Marcus is going to be right outside if you need him." Marcus set his hand on Lily's shoulder. "I'll be in the waiting room," he said. "You can do this." She nodded, but her hands were trembling. Then Susan left, and there was only Lily in the conference room, waiting. Marcus positioned himself in the waiting room, where he could see through the glass panel in the door. He watched Lily sit down, watched her wipe her hands on her pants, watched her take a deep breath. The door opened, and Sandra Mitchell walked in. She was thinner than Marcus had expected, moving carefully like her body was still uncertain about its own strength. But her face transformed the moment she saw Lily, every line of exhaustion and strain erased by the force of her love for her daughter. "Lily," Sandra breathed. "Oh, my baby." She crossed the room and pulled her daughter into her arms, and Marcus saw Lily's entire body relax into the embrace. She was home, not in a place but in her mother's arms. That was home. That was safety. That was what she'd been waiting for. Marcus turned away from the window, giving them privacy. He sat in the waiting room with a cup of cold coffee and a heart that felt like it was splitting open. Because he understood now, with terrible clarity, what he'd been avoiding thinking about. He'd known from the beginning that Lily wasn't his to keep, that she belonged to her mother. That family reunification was always the goal. But somewhere in the last 2 weeks, while he was teaching her to read weather patterns and helping her with math problems and listening to her laugh, he'd started to forget. He'd started to imagine that maybe, somehow she could stay, and now she was going to have to leave. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. Nothing he should do to stop it, because sending a child back to her mother was the right thing. It was the only thing, even though it felt like losing everything all over again. An hour later, Susan came out and told him that Lily would be staying with her mother for a few hours at the motel near the hospital. They'd arranged for Lily to return to the ranch to gather her belongings before the formal transfer happened. Sandra had asked if Marcus would be willing to meet with her privately before that happened. Marcus agreed, though every part of him wanted to refuse. Sandra came out of the conference room with Lily's hand in hers. She looked at Marcus with eyes that had seen suffering and were trying to see hope. She was a woman who'd lost control of her life to illness and circumstance, and was now trying to reclaim it. "You kept my daughter safe," Sandra said. Her voice was hoarse from crying. "I don't know how to thank you for that. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been there. You would have done what mothers do," Marcus said. "You would have fought for her. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time." "No," Sandra said firmly. "You chose to help her. You could have turned her away, called the police, let the system handle it. But you didn't. You took her in. You kept her safe. You taught her that there are good people in the world." Marcus looked at Lily, who was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Gratitude, maybe, and something else. Something that looked like goodbye. "She's a remarkable kid," Marcus said. "You should be proud of her." "I am," Sandra said. "And I hope," she paused, struggling with the words, "I hope you'll let me stay in touch, if you're willing. Lily's talked about you constantly, about how kind you've been. I don't want to erase that from her life." Marcus felt something in his chest loosen slightly. "Not much, but enough, yes," he said. "I'd like that." Lily hugged him before she left, wrapping her small arms around him with surprising strength. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Marcus held her for a moment longer than was probably professional, knowing that this was the moment. The before and after. The last time she'd be his to hold. "You're going to be okay," he said into her hair. "Your mom loves you, and you're stronger than you know. Remember that." After they left, Marcus sat alone in the waiting room and let himself feel the weight of what had just happened. He'd opened his heart to a child. He'd broken his own rules about connection and vulnerability. And now she was leaving, and it was right and it was heartbreaking, and there was nothing to do but accept it. Susan came and sat beside him. "This is hard," she said quietly. "Yes," Marcus agreed, "but you did something good here. You gave her a safe place when she needed one most. You showed her that there are trustworthy adults in the world. That matters. It will stay with her for the rest of her life." Marcus nodded, but he didn't speak. Because speaking would acknowledge that Lily was gone, and he wasn't quite ready for that yet. Later that evening, Lily returned to pack her things. The clothes she'd arrived in had been washed and folded. The items she'd accumulated during her 2-week stay, a book he'd given her, a drawing she'd made in school, a sweater she'd borrowed that she'd grown attached to, fit into a small box. "My mom wants to know if you'd come by," Lily said as Marcus helped load the box into Susan's car. "Once we're settled. She wants to thank you properly." "I'll come by," Marcus said. "Promise?" "Promise." Lily hugged him one more time, and then she was gone. The car drove down the main street of Millbrook, and Marcus watched it disappear, taking with it the small girl who'd asked if she could hide under his coat. The ranch felt impossibly empty that night. The spare room was just a room again. The kitchen table was silent. The house that had learned briefly how to contain joy had returned to its default state of solitude. Marcus sat on his porch in the darkness, and for the first time in 2 weeks, he let himself cry. Not for what Lily had endured, not for his own losses, but for the beautiful, terrible fact that he'd loved someone enough to let them go, and that loving had transformed him in ways he was still too close to understand. 3 weeks after Lily left, Marcus found himself existing rather than living. The ranch still demanded his attention. Cattle needed feeding, fences needed mending. The endless cycle of agricultural work continued regardless of whether he was present emotionally or merely going through the motions. He worked mechanically, his body moving through familiar patterns, while his mind remained somewhere else entirely. The spare room stayed empty. The coffee maker sat unused most mornings. The kitchen table, which had briefly become a place where 2 people solved math problems and shared meals, was now just a place where 1 man ate in silence. He'd told himself he wouldn't do this, wouldn't spiral, wouldn't use Lily's departure as an excuse to retreat back into the isolation that had defined his life for so long. But knowing something and doing it were very different things. His old friend loneliness had been patient. It had waited in the corners of his house, knowing he'd eventually open the door wide enough to let it back in. Marcus was driving into town for supplies when he saw the sign. A small handmade poster taped to the bulletin board outside the general store. Millbrook Community Holiday Fair, December 3rd. Volunteers needed. Contact Patricia Chen at the hospital. It was mid-November. The fair was nearly 3 weeks away. Marcus stood there reading the sign, knowing he had no business volunteering for anything community-related. He wasn't a community person. He wasn't the kind of man who showed up to events. He was the quiet rancher who kept to himself. But then he thought about Lily, about the conversations they'd had during those 2 weeks, about her telling him that she was glad he hadn't stayed alone, about the fact that hiding from connection had only delayed the inevitable. Pain found you anyway, and when it did, you faced it unprepared. He took down Patricia's number. That evening, he called. Patricia answered on the second ring, and he could hear the surprise in her voice when she recognized his name. "Marcus," she said warmly. "How are you?" "I'm calling about the volunteer opportunity," he said. "For the community fair." "Really?" Patricia's surprise was evident. I have to say I didn't picture you as a fair volunteer. I'm not, Marcus said, but I'm trying to be someone different. If you need help, I'm available. There was a pause, and then Patricia said something that struck him deeply. I think Lily would be proud of you for that. The Fair Planning Committee met on a Thursday evening at the community centre. There were 8 people at the table, local business owners, teachers, parents. Patricia was there, along with Sarah Connolly, the same teacher who'd helped with school materials for Lily during her placement. Several people Marcus recognized from around town, but had never spoken to. He felt immediately out of place. But he sat at the table and listened as they discussed the layout, the vendors, the entertainment. There would be a children's section with games and activities. A craft fair, local musicians performing. Food vendors. We need someone to oversee the children's section, Patricia said. Someone who can set up the game booths, make sure everything is safe and well organized, help manage the volunteers who'll be manning the activities. Everyone looked at everyone else, and Marcus realized they were all trying to think of someone suitable, someone patient, someone good with kids. I'll do it, Marcus said, his voice cutting through the silence. Sarah Connolly's eyebrows went up slightly. You want to oversee the children's section? Yes, Marcus said. I have experience with children. I'm organized. I'm reliable. He didn't elaborate, didn't explain about Lily, or the 2 weeks that had changed his life, or the fact that he was trying to prove something to himself. The committee accepted his offer without pressing for details. Over the next 3 weeks, Marcus found himself increasingly involved in the fair preparations. He met with vendors, checked safety standards on games and booths, coordinated with volunteers. It required him to interact with people in ways he hadn't in years, to make decisions collaboratively, to show up repeatedly in public spaces. Patricia invited him for coffee one afternoon during a planning meeting break. They sat in a small cafe near the hospital, and she looked at him with the kind of understanding that came from professional training in reading people. This is about Lily, Patricia said. It wasn't a question. Partially, Marcus admitted. But it's also about me. She made me realize I was hiding, that I'd convinced myself isolation was protection, but it was just avoidance. She's with her mother. That's right. That's where she should be. But what I'm still figuring out is what I do with what I learned from her being there. Have you seen her? Patricia asked. No, Marcus said. Sandra invited me by, but I thought it would be better to give them space, to let them rebuild without me hovering. Have you considered that Lily might want to see you? Patricia asked gently. That maintaining connection with you might be important to her, especially as she and her mother rebuild their relationship. You're part of her story now. Removing yourself completely might actually hurt rather than help. Marcus hadn't considered that. He'd been so focused on what was right, what the system said was right, what the experts recommended, that he hadn't thought about what Lily herself might need. I could write to her, Marcus said slowly. See if she wants contact. That's a start, Patricia agreed. That night, Marcus sat at his kitchen table with a piece of paper and a pen. Writing wasn't something he did much of, but he found the words came, slowly at first, and then with increasing confidence. He wrote about the ranch, about the animals, about the weather turning cold and snow appearing on the mountains. He wrote about volunteering for the community fair and overseeing the children's games. He wrote about how Lily had taught him that it was possible to change, even when you'd spent years believing you couldn't. He didn't write anything demanding or expectant. Just a simple letter from someone who cared, reaching out to say hello. He addressed it to Sandra's apartment and included his return address. Then he put it in the mail and tried not to spend the next 2 weeks obsessing over whether Lily would respond. The response came as a package, not a letter. Inside was a drawing clearly done by a child's hand. It showed a house on a mountain with a figure that had to be Marcus, and a smaller figure beside him. There was a sun in the corner and mountains in the distance. Across the top, in Lily's careful handwriting, "My home is still in your coat." With the drawing was a letter from Sandra. "Marcus, I wanted you to hear this from me directly. Lily talks about you constantly. She draws pictures of the ranch. She tells me about the math problems you helped her with, about the coffee you drank together, about feeling safe under your coat. My daughter has been through a lot, and I know that what you did for her during those 2 weeks was crucial. But I also want you to know that you gave her something else. You showed her that kindness exists, that trust can be rewarded, that broken people can take care of other broken people. I'm doing better. Therapy is helping. I'm back at work part-time. Things are slowly becoming normal, but normal isn't the same as good. And I've been thinking a lot about what you and Lily built together. I'd like for you to be part of her life going forward. Not as a replacement for anything, but as an addition. As someone she cares about who cares about her. If you're willing, we'd love for you to visit, to stay in touch, to be the man who reminds her that there are good people in the world. Thank you for saving my daughter. Thank you for keeping her safe. Thank you for being the person she needed." With gratitude, Sandra Marcus read the letter 3 times. Then he looked at Lily's drawing again, at her childish interpretation of the ranch house, at the 2 figures that represented the connection they'd formed. He picked up his phone and called Patricia. "I need to know when Lily has time off from school," he said. "I want to invite her and her mother out to the ranch, properly, for a meal, a visit. Something that's just about spending time together." "That's a wonderful idea," Patricia said. "Let me coordinate with Sandra. I think this could be really healing for everyone involved." 2 weeks later, on a Saturday morning before the community fair, Marcus spent the entire day preparing. He cleaned the house thoroughly, something he rarely did beyond basic functionality. He bought groceries for a proper meal. He set up the spare room with fresh sheets, not because anyone would sleep there, but because he wanted Lily to see that the space where she'd stayed was still being cared for. When they arrived, Sandra driving a small sedan with Lily pressed against the passenger window, craning to see the ranch, Marcus felt nervous in a way he hadn't felt since the day she'd first asked him for shelter. Lily bounded out of the car the moment it stopped, and she launched herself at Marcus with the unself-conscious enthusiasm of a child who'd learned her affection was safe. "I missed you," she said into his chest. Marcus held her, and for the first time in weeks, he felt the hollow days begin to fill. Not completely, never completely, but enough to remind him that loneliness was a choice, and he'd chosen finally not to make that choice anymore. Sandra came around the car with a smile that held both gratitude and hope. "Thank you for having us," she said. "Thank you for coming," Marcus replied. They spent the afternoon on the ranch. Marcus showed Lily the calves that had been born since she left, the fences he'd repaired, the new growth on the trees around the property. He introduced her to the horses, including the old mare that had been in the pasture when she arrived. Lily groomed the mare's mane carefully, methodically, the way Marcus had shown her. Sandra sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching her daughter and this man who'd become part of their family's story, and Marcus could see tears on her cheeks. Not sad tears, the kind that come when you realize things could have gone so much worse, but didn't. That evening, as the sun dropped behind the mountains, they sat at the kitchen table together. 3 people bound by crisis and survival and the choice to stay connected, despite every reason not to. They ate a simple meal. They talked and laughed. Lily showed Marcus her schoolwork and told him about her friend Emma and the book she was reading. After they left, driving back toward town as darkness settled fully, Marcus sat on his porch for a long time. The ranch was no longer just his place of solitude. It had become a place where connection happened, where a girl could run and play safely, where a man who'd spent half his life alone had learned that loneliness wasn't inevitable, it was just habit, and habits, he was learning, could be broken by something as simple as opening your coat to shelter a child who needed saving, and discovering in the process that you needed saving too. The Millbrook Community Holiday Fair opened on a Saturday morning in early December with the kind of crystalline cold that made everything feel possible. The grass was crisp with frost, the sky impossibly blue, and the town square had been transformed into a maze of booths, games, and vendor stalls. Lights strung between lampposts flickered in the daylight, and the smell of cinnamon and roasted nuts drifted across the grounds. Marcus stood in the children's section, which had been his primary responsibility during the planning phase. He'd worked with volunteers to set up 4 game booths: a ring toss, a beanbag throw, a fishing game with magnetic rods, and a duck pond where children selected ducks with numbers written on the bottom to win prizes. Everything was bright, accessible, and age-appropriate. What he hadn't expected was how much he'd enjoy it. Families began arriving around 9 o'clock. Children in winter coats and hats, parents trying to manage multiple offspring while navigating the fair. Marcus found himself helping a young boy who was too short to reach the ring toss platform. He adjusted the height, showed the child how to hold the ring properly, and when the boy's ring landed around a bottle successfully, Marcus heard joy in the child's celebration that reminded him acutely of Lily. By mid-morning, the fair was full. The weather had held, and people had turned out in unexpected numbers. Marcus moved through the children's section, making sure volunteers were managing the games appropriately, helping younger children who needed assistance. Ensuring the prizes were being distributed fairly, Patricia found him near the duck pond, watching a little girl with red pigtails carefully selecting a duck. "You look comfortable doing this," Patricia observed. "I'm learning," Marcus said. "These kids aren't so different from Lily. They just want to know someone's paying attention, that they matter." "You've changed a lot in the last couple of months," Patricia said. "You know that, right?" Marcus watched the red-haired girl shriek with delight when she won a small stuffed animal. "Lily changed me," he said. "I didn't have a choice in the matter. She just walked into my life and decided I was the person she needed. And somehow I decided she was right." By early afternoon, Lily and Sandra arrived at the fair. Lily spotted Marcus immediately and made a beeline toward him, pulling her mother along by the hand. She was wearing a green coat with a matching hat, and her face was flushed with excitement. "Marcus!" she called out. "We're here. Mum brought me to see your games." Marcus felt a shift in how people were looking at him. He was no longer just the quiet rancher who kept to himself. He was a man with a child who clearly cared about him, who hugged him openly, who called out his name across a crowded fair without self-consciousness. "Come on," he said to Lily. "I'll show you all the booths." He walked them through the children's section, explaining each game, introducing Lily to the volunteers. Sandra watched with an expression that was difficult to read, something between gratitude and amusement, and something else Marcus couldn't quite identify. "You're good at this," Sandra said, as Lily went to try the fishing game with the magnetic rod. "With the kids, with organizing, with being present, I didn't used to be," Marcus said. "I was good at being alone. That was my skill set. Lily kind of forced me to develop new ones, has she?" Sandra asked. "Or were they always in you, just waiting for the right reason to come out?" It was a question Marcus didn't have an answer to. He was saved from responding by Lily, who came running back holding a small plastic fish she'd won. "I got one. Did you see? I got one without any help." "I saw," Marcus said. That was perfect form. Lily spent the next hour at the fair, trying every game multiple times, accumulating a small pile of prizes. But what struck Marcus most was how other people treated her when they saw her with him. Parents who might otherwise have kept their distance from the quiet rancher now smiled at him. Children who saw the obvious affection between Marcus and Lily wanted similar attention from him. By the end of the afternoon, Marcus realized he was no longer invisible in Millbrook. Or rather, he was visible in a completely different way. He wasn't the strange, isolated man to be avoided. He was the man who'd helped a child, the man who cared about community, The man who showed up and did work that mattered. It was a strange form of visibility, and it took some adjustment. The next major shift came 3 weeks into the new year. Patricia called him on a Tuesday morning with news. "David Mercer has been charged with child endangerment and abuse," Patricia said. The investigation confirmed everything Lily said, and there was additional evidence suggesting he'd attempted similar manipulation with another family in a neighboring county. He's pleaded guilty and is being sentenced next month. "I wanted you to hear it directly from me, before it becomes public knowledge." Marcus felt a surge of something between relief and anger. The system had worked, however, slowly and imperfectly. David Mercer was no longer a threat. "Thank you for telling me," Marcus said. "There's more," Patricia continued. "Sandra has been working with us on some additional questions about her care. And one of the things she's been thinking about is stability for Lily going forward. She asked if I thought you'd be interested in becoming an official mentor through a formal program we have. It's not foster care. Lily would continue living with her mother. But it would be a structured relationship where you'd have regular contact, could be listed as an emergency contact, could have standing if any issues arose in the future." Marcus didn't hesitate. "Yes, I'd do that." The mentorship program required training, which Marcus completed over the course of several weeks. He learned about child development, trauma responses, appropriate boundaries, and how to be a stable adult presence in a child's life. None of it was complicated in theory, though he suspected it would be in practice. By the time winter turned towards spring, Marcus's life had become unrecognizable from what it had been 6 months earlier. He had regular contact with Lily, weekend visits, occasional afternoons in town, phone calls on Wednesday evenings before dinner. He was involved in her school activities, her therapy sessions with the counselor who was helping her process her experiences with David Mercer. He'd also become a regular at the community center, not just for the fair planning, which had continued into planning for spring and summer events, but actually showing up, having coffee with Patricia, helping Sarah Connolly's classroom with a ranch education project, sitting on the initial advisory board for an expanded youth mentorship program that had been inspired by the work Patricia was doing. The isolation that had defined his adult life wasn't gone. Marcus still treasured his quiet mornings on the ranch. He still needed solitude to function properly, but solitude and isolation were different things. Solitude was a choice. Isolation had been a prison he'd built and then convinced himself he preferred. One afternoon in early spring, Marcus was at the house doing ranch work when Sandra called. "I have something I need to talk to you about," she said. And there was a note in her voice that made him alert. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately. "Nothing's wrong," Sandra said. "That's the thing. Nothing's wrong. Everything's actually really good. Lily's doing well in school. I've been off my medications for 2 months with my psychiatrist's approval. Work is going well. We're stable, and I've been thinking about what that means." "What does it mean?" Marcus asked carefully. "It means I want to know if you'd be willing to do something for me," Sandra said. "For us, really. Lily asks about you constantly. She's been in therapy and she's processing a lot of what happened. One of the things she's been talking about is that she needed someone to believe in her when she didn't believe in herself. Someone to prove that she was worth protecting." Marcus could hear something in Sandra's voice that sounded like carefully controlled emotion. "She's asking if maybe you'd consider being her godfather," Sandra said. "Or something like that. It wouldn't be legal guardianship, she's got me for that. But it would be a formal acknowledgement that you're part of her family, that you matter to her in a permanent way." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "Yes," he said. "I'd be honored to be her godfather, really." There was relief in Sandra's voice. "Really? When does she want to do the ceremony or whatever?" "Her birthday's in May," Sandra said. "She's turning 11. We were thinking maybe we could do a small celebration, invite some people she cares about, and make it official then." In May, on a Saturday afternoon, a small group gathered at Sandra's apartment. Patricia was there. Sarah Connolly came. Robert Chen from the feed store brought his family, even Frank Hollis, the man whose testimony had helped take down David Mercer. showed up with his wife and kids. Lily wore a dress she'd picked out specifically for the occasion, blue with white flowers, and she was beaming in a way that made Marcus's chest tight. They stood in Sandra's living room while Patricia, in her official capacity as coordinator of the mentorship program, read a statement about family and connection and the various forms it took. Then Lily hugged Marcus and whispered, "Thank you for being my godfather. Thank you for saving me." And Marcus, who'd spent so many years believing he had nothing to offer anyone, who'd built his life around the assumption that he was meant to be alone, realized that the most important thing he'd ever done was say yes to a small girl in the rain, asking if she could hide under his coat. The coat had become a home. The ranch had become a sanctuary for more than just him. And silence, which had once been his entire language, had become something he could choose to break whenever connection was worth the risk. He looked at Lily's smiling face, at Sandra's grateful tears, at the room full of people who'd come to celebrate a child's survival and resilience, and understood finally what it meant to live instead of merely endure. By summer, exactly 1 year since Lily had knocked on Marcus's door asking for shelter, something unexpected happened. The town began to expect things from him. Not in a demanding way, but in the casual assumption that comes when someone has proven they're willing to show up. The school called asking if he'd be willing to speak at Career Day about ranch work. The youth mentorship program asked if he'd consider taking on a second mentee. The community center asked if he'd help supervise the new after-school program for kids whose parents worked until evening. Marcus found himself saying yes to most of it. But somewhere around the third or fourth new commitment, he began to feel something he hadn't anticipated. Not the old isolation creeping back, that wasn't it, but something closer to suffocation. The weight of being needed by people was different from the weight of being alone, but it was still weight. He was at the ranch on a July afternoon, working on replacing fence boards that had rotted during the winter, when Patricia called. "I need to ask you something," Patricia said without preamble. "And I need you to be completely honest with me." "Are you okay?" Marcus paused in his work, sitting back on his heels in the dust. "Why would you ask that?" "Because I've been watching you and I'm noticing something. You're taking on more and more, but you're not present in the same way you were with Lily. You're scattered. You're going through motions instead of being intentional. And I'm concerned you're doing the thing people often do when they've been alone for a long time." "What thing?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he knew. "Overcompensating," Patricia said. "Trying to prove you're worthy of connection by being everything to everyone. It's a trauma response, actually. Someone who's been isolated often swings too far in the other direction when connection becomes possible. They start to believe that constant availability and service is the price of belonging." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. She was right. He could feel it in the exhaustion that had become his baseline, in the way he'd stopped enjoying his quiet mornings on the ranch, in the fact that he couldn't remember the last time he'd just sat with a cup of coffee without thinking about what he should be doing instead. "What should I do?" he asked. "You should do what's hardest for you," Patricia said. "You should say no to things. You should set boundaries. You should understand that your value isn't determined by how much you do or how many people depend on you. You can be present without being available all the time. You can care about people without sacrificing yourself." After the call, Marcus sat on his porch for the first time in weeks without immediately moving to the next task. He looked out at his land, at the mountains beyond, at the quiet that had always been his sanctuary and had become briefly something he was running from. He spent that evening making a list, the things he'd committed to, the things that genuinely mattered to him, the things he'd agreed to out of guilt or obligation, or the fear that saying no meant losing everything he'd worked to build. The realization was humbling. He'd committed to 43 hours of additional work over the next month, on top of running the ranch and his existing involvement with Lily and Sandra. He was working at a pace that would have been unsustainable for anyone, and he was doing it because he was terrified that if he wasn't constantly proving his worth, people would realize he wasn't worth keeping around anyway. The next morning, Marcus made phone calls. To the school, he'd do career day, but not the weekly mentoring sessions. To the mentorship program, he would take on a second mentee, but not until fall, when he'd had time to properly prepare. To the community center, he'd help with supervision, but for 2 hours a week, not 5. The conversations were harder than he'd expected. He kept apologizing, offering explanations, trying to soften the word no, but he did it. And when it was done, he felt simultaneously lighter and oddly guilty, like he was abandoning people who'd come to count on him. Patricia called 2 days later. "I heard you scaled back your commitments," she said. "How does that feel?" "Strange," Marcus admitted. "Like I'm letting people down. Or like you're being realistic about what one person can actually sustain," Patricia countered. "Marcus, you can't set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. That's not sustainable, and it's not ultimately helpful to anyone. When you burn out, everyone loses the best version of you." The hard part came in mid-August, when Lily arrived for one of their regular visits and immediately sensed something was different. "You're sad," she said, sitting on the porch beside him. "Are you sad about me?" Marcus felt his chest constrict. This was the complicated part nobody talked about. That care could be a burden. That love could include disappointment and frustration, and the need to take things back. That being a good person sometimes meant breaking promises you'd made because you'd overestimated your capacity. "I'm not sad about you," Marcus said carefully. "I'm figuring some things out about myself. Sometimes, when we're trying to fix things outside ourselves, we forget to take care of what's inside. Does that make sense?" Lily nodded solemnly. "Like when I stopped eating because I was worried about Mom, and then I got sick." "Like that," Marcus confirmed. "I've been trying so hard to be the person you needed me to be, and the person the community needed me to be, that I forgot to be the person I need to be." "Who do you need to be?" Lily asked. It was such a simple question, but it contained everything. Marcus thought about it carefully. "I need to be someone who takes care of his ranch," he said. "Someone who has quiet time. Someone who can be fully present when he's with people, instead of worried about what he's not doing. Someone who can say no without feeling like he's broken the contract of being loved. Does that make sense?" "Yeah," Lily said. "Mom does that sometimes. She says she has to say no to things so she can say yes to me. She says it's not mean to take care of yourself." Out of the mouths of children, Marcus thought. Sandra, who'd survived mental illness and loss and the cruelty of circumstance, had understood something that had taken him a year and multiple wake-up calls to learn. The next few months became about integration, not returning to isolation, but finding the balance between connection and solitude. Marcus maintained his commitments to Lily and Sandra. He kept his involvement in the mentorship program and community activities, but at a sustainable level. And he protected his time, whole days, where the ranch was his priority, where he worked at his own pace, where he sat on his porch with coffee and didn't think about what needed doing next. Fall arrived with its particular beauty. The aspens turned gold. The nights became crisp. The cattle were moved to lower pasture in preparation for winter. Lily was in 6th grade now, navigating the complicated social landscape of middle school with a resilience that came, in part, from knowing she'd already survived worse. She had friends. She did well in school. She was in therapy on a regular basis, working through her trauma with a skilled counselor who understood that healing wasn't linear. Sandra had been promoted at work. She was dating someone, a kind man named Thomas, who'd appeared gradually at family dinners and seemed genuinely interested in both Sandra and Lily. Marcus had met Thomas and assessed him carefully, the way he imagined a godfather should. The verdict was positive. Thomas was patient, genuine, and he didn't try to replace anything. He was just adding to what already existed. One evening in October, Marcus received a letter from David Mercer's appellate attorney. It was a cold document, impersonal in its legal language. David was appealing his conviction based on several grounds, one of which was that his former client, the man the attorney was now representing, believed he'd been denied adequate representation at trial. Marcus read the letter twice, feeling the old anger surface. The violation that came from knowing that Mercer wasn't accepting responsibility, wasn't accepting the finality of his conviction, was fighting for another chance through the legal system. His first instinct was to call Patricia, then Sandra, then every authority figure he could contact to ensure this didn't go anywhere. But he paused. Instead, he called Patricia anyway, but with a different question. What's the realistic likelihood of this appeal succeeding? He asked. Patricia, who'd become something like a close friend over the past year, took a moment to respond. Realistically, very low. His original attorney provided adequate representation. The evidence against him was strong. The conviction is solid. Appeals of this nature are filed regularly and rarely succeed. But I understand why you're worried. I'm worried because I'm thinking about Lily, Marcus said. If this goes to trial again, she might have to testify. She might be re-traumatized, and it would all be happening because of something completely beyond our control. That's true, Patricia said. But it's also true that Lily is stronger now than she was a year ago. She has support. She has you, she has her mother, she has a therapist. If this does go to trial, we'll handle it carefully. And statistically, this appeal will not succeed. I can't promise there won't be challenges, but I can promise we'll face them as prepared as we can be. Marcus decided not to tell Lily or Sandra about the appeal immediately. There was no point creating fear about something that likely wouldn't happen. Instead, he focused on what he could control. He increased his weekly visits with Lily. He checked in with Sandra more regularly. He reinforced the support system without explaining why. 3 months later, the appeal was denied. Marcus received notice through Patricia and then passed along the information to Sandra, who wept with relief. David Mercer's conviction would stand. He would serve his sentence. There would be no retrial, no additional trauma for Lily. That evening, Marcus sat in his truck at the top of the ridge overlooking his ranch, watching the sun set over the valley. He thought about the arc of the year, how he'd gone from isolated survival to overcommitted chaos to this new equilibrium where connection existed alongside solitude, where he could care deeply about people without losing himself in that caring, where he could be needed without believing his existence depended on meeting every need. Lily had taught him that. A small girl who'd knocked on his door asking for shelter had opened a door in his own heart that had been locked for decades. But she'd also taught him something else, that healing wasn't about becoming someone different. It was about becoming more fully yourself, about integrating the broken pieces with the whole, about learning that vulnerability wasn't weakness, but honest acknowledgement of your need for connection. The next morning, Marcus woke to frost on the grass and the first real hint of winter in the air. He made coffee the way Lily had taught him years ago. He sat on his porch as the sun came up, and he allowed himself to feel something he'd rarely felt in his adult life. Simple, uncomplicated gratitude for the life he was living. Not perfect, not without complications, but real, fully inhabited, worth staying for. 2 years after Lily first arrived at his ranch, Marcus received an unexpected visitor. A woman in her early 30s, professional-looking, with cautious eyes and a notebook in her hands. She introduced herself as Rebecca Chen, Patricia's younger sister, and explained that she was a social worker working with the state child welfare department, focusing on community-based intervention programs. "I've been hearing a lot about you," Rebecca said as they sat on Marcus's porch with coffee. "Patricia talks about the work you do with the mentorship program. I've been reviewing case files where you've been listed as a mentor or support figure, and I'm noticing something interesting." "What's that?" Marcus asked. "The outcomes are significantly better when mentors like you are involved," Rebecca said. "Not just incrementally better, significantly. Kids who might otherwise have ended up in foster care are staying with family. Kids who've experienced trauma are processing it more effectively. And a lot of that has to do with having a stable adult who isn't in a position of authority, who's genuinely invested in their well-being, who has time to show up consistently." She leaned forward. I'm working on a proposal for the state. A pilot program that would train and support community-based mentors for children in crisis situations. No compensation, it would be voluntary, but structured with training, resources, regular check-ins. I'm wondering if you'd be interested in helping me develop this program. Not just as a participant, but as someone who's lived the model. Marcus listened carefully. He'd learned in the past 2 years to be thoughtful about commitments, to ask questions, to understand what he was actually being asked to do. But he also recognized something important in Rebecca's proposal. It was about systematizing what had worked for Lily, about potentially helping other children the way he'd been able to help her. What would that actually entail? He asked. Right now. Conversation, Rebecca said. Meetings with me, maybe once or twice a month. Talking through what worked, what didn't, what resources you needed that weren't available. Then, once the proposal is developed, potentially some training delivery, teaching people what you've learned about being present for a traumatized child, but only as much as you're comfortable with. This wouldn't become your full-time job. Marcus agreed to preliminary conversations with the clear understanding that he would be honest about what he could and couldn't do. Rebecca turned out to be methodical and respectful of boundaries. She never pushed. She just asked good questions and took careful notes. Over the course of several months, working with Rebecca and 3 other mentors from the community, a framework emerged. The program, which came to be called the Millbrook Stability Initiative, combined structured mentoring with existing services. Mentors would receive training on trauma response, appropriate boundaries, and communication with child welfare agencies. They'd commit to a minimum of 5 hours weekly with their assigned mentee, with regular check-ins from program coordinators. The pilot program launched in spring, with Marcus, 2 other experienced mentors, and 4 new mentors being trained to work with 12 children in crisis situations. Marcus continued his work with Lily, but also became the informal leader of the mentor group. The irony wasn't lost on him. A man who'd spent 40 years avoiding community was now helping to build its infrastructure. Lily noticed the change in him almost immediately. "You're busier," she observed one afternoon, sitting at the kitchen table while Marcus prepared dinner. "A little," Marcus admitted. "I'm helping Patricia and her sister with something at the hospital. A program for kids who need mentors. Like how you mentor me?" Lily asked. "Similar," Marcus said. "Except this is teaching other people how to do what we do. How to be there for someone who's been hurt." Lily was quiet for a moment, thinking. "That's good," she said finally. "Because there are a lot of kids who need that. I was lucky to find you. Other kids shouldn't have to be as lucky as me." By midsummer, the Millbrook Stability Initiative had attracted attention from the state capitol. A representative from the Department of Family Services visited to observe the program in action. What she found was a group of trained, supported mentors working with children who were showing marked improvement in school performance, behavioral stability, and emotional well-being. 6 months into the pilot, the state funding came through to expand the program to other communities in the region. Rebecca asked if Marcus would be willing to help train mentors in neighboring towns. He agreed to do so quarterly, traveling to 3 other communities to conduct training sessions and consult on implementation. It was during one of these training sessions that Marcus met James, a man in his late 50s, quiet and awkward in groups, who'd recently retired from a career in mining and was looking for something meaningful to do with his remaining years. James reminded Marcus of himself, guarded, uncertain about whether he had anything to offer, convinced his life had been too narrow and damaged to be useful to anyone else. During a break in the training, Marcus pulled James aside. "Why are you here?" Marcus asked. James looked uncomfortable. "I thought maybe I could help. My granddaughter is in foster care. Her mother struggles with addiction. Her father isn't in the picture. And I realized I didn't want to just write checks to organizations and feel good about myself. I wanted to actually do something. Have you ever been a mentor before?" Marcus asked. "No," James said. "Never done anything like this. I worked underground for 35 years. That doesn't exactly prepare you for sitting down with traumatized kids. Marcus recognized something in James's tone. The self-doubt, the conviction that past pain disqualified you from helping others. I ran a cattle ranch for 15 years without speaking to a single person if I could help it, Marcus said. Then a child asked me to shelter her and I said yes, and it changed everything. You don't need to have been a mentor before. You just need to be willing to show up, be honest, and keep showing up even when it's hard. By the end of the training, James had committed to the program and been matched with a 9-year-old boy named Derek, who'd been removed from his mother's care due to neglect and substance abuse in the home. Marcus made a mental note to check in with James to make sure the transition went smoothly, because he understood in a way that had taken him years to learn, that the best way to honor the transformation Lily had catalyzed in his life was to help facilitate similar transformations for others. The ripple effect became visible over time. James's mentoring of Derek stabilized the boy's school attendance and began the process of healing. Derek's improvement inspired Derek's older sister to accept mentoring as well, which in turn led to their mother getting intensive treatment support with the goal of eventual family reunification. One relationship, one person willing to show up consistently, had shifted the trajectory of an entire family system. Other similar stories began to emerge across the Millbrook Stability Initiative. Children who'd been headed toward increasingly difficult placements instead remained stabilized. Families that had been torn apart by crisis began slow, complicated processes of repair. Mentors like James discovered that their perceived inadequacy was actually an asset. They understood struggle, understood that transformation takes time, understood the value of simple, consistent presence. By the time Lily turned 13, the program had expanded to serve over 200 children across 6 communities in Wyoming. The success rate was remarkable enough to attract attention from national organizations working in child welfare. Rebecca received invitations to present at conferences. The program was featured in a state government publication. Marcus was asked to be interviewed by a local news station about his work mentoring vulnerable youth. He almost declined the interview. But then he thought about all the Jameses out there. People who'd spent decades isolated, convinced they had nothing to offer, waiting for permission to engage with their communities. And he agreed. The interview aired on a Saturday morning. Marcus watched it with Lily and Sandra and Thomas, who'd moved in with them 6 months earlier and had become an important part of their small family unit. Watching himself on screen was deeply uncomfortable. But he listened to himself talk about the day Lily asked for shelter, about learning that opening your heart to someone didn't require you to be perfect, about the fact that the most powerful intervention is often the simplest one, showing up consistently, treating someone like they matter, believing that change is possible. After the interview, people Marcus had known for years, but rarely spoken to, approached him in town. They thanked him. They told him about kids in their own families who needed mentors. They asked how they could get involved with the program. Patricia called him the next day. "That interview is going to change things," she said. "You've given people permission to do something they were already afraid to attempt. You've shown them that you don't need to be qualified to matter, that ordinary people can do extraordinary things." That's powerful, Marcus, but with visibility came complication. There was a woman named Helen who'd been reading about the Millbrook Stability Initiative and reached out to Marcus directly, asking if she could move to Wyoming and be trained as a mentor. Her circumstances were complicated. She was running from an abusive marriage and had limited resources. Patricia did an intake assessment and determined that while Helen was genuine in her desire to help, she wasn't in a stable enough position to be an effective mentor to a child. Marcus had to deliver that message, and Helen reacted with anger, convinced that Marcus was being judgmental, that he was gatekeeping help to people he deemed worthy. "I'm not judging you," Marcus explained carefully. "I'm saying that before you can help a traumatized child, you need to be stable yourself." That's not a moral statement. That's a practical one. Children with trauma need consistency and emotional availability. If you're in crisis, you can't provide that. Helen didn't accept the explanation gracefully. She left angry, and Marcus had to sit with the reality that not everyone would understand his boundaries. That trying to help sometimes meant disappointing people. That visibility meant being subject to criticism and misunderstanding. By fall, the Millbrook Stability Initiative had become something far larger than Marcus had anticipated. It was a state program with funding and structure and institutional backing. It had transformed from something Marcus did on his porch with Lily into something that served hundreds of children. And Marcus had become, somewhat to his discomfort, a public figure, a spokesperson for a movement, someone people looked to for wisdom about trauma and healing, but underneath all of it remained the core relationship that had started everything. Marcus and Lily, sitting together on the porch, talking about school and friends and books, maintaining the connection that had fundamentally altered both their lives. One evening, as Lily was leaving after a visit, she hugged Marcus and whispered, "I'm proud of you for doing this, for helping other kids the way you helped me, for not staying alone." Marcus held her, this girl who'd become a young woman, and understood that the greatest gift she'd given him wasn't the love or the redemption or even the purpose he'd found through helping her. It was permission. Permission to stop running from connection. Permission to believe he was worthy of love. Permission to be the kind of person who could stand in front of a camera and tell his story, not because he was exceptional, but because he was ordinary. He was just a rancher who'd said yes when someone needed him. And that simplicity, that willingness to be present rather than to have all the answers, had rippled outward in ways neither of them could have imagined. 3 years after Lily's arrival, Marcus received a call that changed everything again. It was Patricia, and her voice was tighter than he'd ever heard it. "We need to talk," she said. "In person. Can you come by my office this afternoon?" Marcus left the ranch work and drove to the hospital. When he arrived, he found Patricia in her office looking exhausted in a way that went beyond normal fatigue. She closed the door behind him and gestured to a chair. "I need to tell you something," Patricia said. "And I need to tell it to you before anyone else, because you deserve to hear it directly." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. His mind immediately went to worst-case scenarios. Something had happened to Lily, something with the program, something that required him to brace himself. "What is it?" he asked. "I'm leaving," Patricia said flatly. "I'm resigning from the hospital at the end of the year. I'm burned out. I've been working in this field for 25 years, and I've reached the point where I can't do it anymore without destroying myself." Marcus wasn't sure what to say. Patricia was the glue that held so much of the support system together. She was the one who'd guided him through the process of helping Lily. She was the coordinator of the entire mentorship program. "What does that mean for the program?" Marcus asked. "Rebecca will be taking over as coordinator," Patricia said. "She's more than capable. But I want to be honest with you about something, Marcus. The reason I'm leaving isn't just burnout. It's that I've been thinking a lot about what I told you 2 years ago, about setting boundaries, about not burning yourself out to keep others warm." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I didn't follow my own advice. I kept taking on more and more work. I kept saying yes to every request, every expansion, every new initiative. And I've been running on fumes for the past year. The program is important, but it's not important enough to sacrifice my health, my life, my relationships." Marcus listened quietly, hearing the echo of his own struggle in her words. "I'm telling you this," Patricia continued, "because I'm watching you do the same thing I did. You've achieved this remarkable balance with your personal life, but you're pouring an enormous amount of energy into the program. You're the public face of it. You're the mentor that other mentors look to. You're on the advisory board. You're training people in multiple counties. And I'm wondering if you've stopped to check in with yourself about whether this is sustainable." Marcus wanted to defend himself, to explain that this was different, that he was managing his time better. But he knew she was right. He'd scaled back the immediate community commitments, but he'd replaced them with this broader institutional work. He was still overextended, just in different ways. What should I do? He asked. I don't know, Patricia said honestly. That's your decision to make. But I wanted you to know that I'm choosing myself. That after 25 years of putting everyone else first, I'm going to have a life that's just mine for a while. And I think you should consider what that might look like for you. After the meeting, Marcus sat in his truck for a long time without starting the engine. He thought about the past 3 years, about how he'd moved from isolation to overextension to a kind of equilibrium that was actually still precarious, about how easy it was to feel virtuous about overwork when the work was helping people, about how Patricia's wisdom, set boundaries, protect your own well-being, applied even more to him than it had a year ago. That evening, he called Rebecca. I need to step back from some of my roles in the program, he said without preamble. Not completely, but significantly. I'll continue mentoring Lily and advising on program direction. But I'm done with the quarterly training sessions. I'm stepping down from the advisory board. I want to be involved, but not in a way that requires me to be constantly performing or traveling or representing something larger than myself. Rebecca's response was immediate and unsurprised. Patricia called me after your meeting, she said. She was worried about you. I was waiting to see how long it would take you to reach this conclusion yourself. How long did it take Patricia to reach it? Marcus asked. About 5 years too long, Rebecca said. Don't be Patricia. Don't wait until you're broken to make changes. The announcement of Marcus's scaled-back involvement caused ripples through the program. Some people expressed disappointment. Others understood immediately. James, the mentor Marcus had trained, who was now supervising other mentors, called to check in. I heard you're stepping back, James said. I wanted to tell you that's the right call. And I want to thank you for something. You taught me that I could be useful even though I thought I wasn't, that my brokenness wasn't disqualifying. But you also taught me, and I'm telling you what you need to hear, that you have to protect yourself. You can't pour from an empty cup. Marcus smiled despite his exhaustion. The wisdom he'd tried to pass on to others was being reflected back to him, and he needed to hear it. The final piece of this reckoning came in December. Lily had started high school and was navigating the usual adolescent complications, friendship drama, academic pressure, the identity confusion that characterized the teenage years. But there was an additional layer for Lily. She carried the knowledge of her own trauma. She'd been in therapy long enough to understand her triggers, her patterns, her healing journey. She came to the ranch one Saturday looking troubled. They sat on the porch, the same porch where this entire story had begun, and Lily was quiet for a long time before speaking. I need to tell you something, she said finally, and I need to know that you're not going to feel responsible for how I feel about it. Okay, Marcus said carefully. I'm tired of being a symbol, Lily said, of the Millbrook Stability Initiative success story, of the kid who was saved. I'm grateful for everything you did, and I love you, but I'm starting to feel like my whole identity is wrapped up in my trauma. Like I'm not Lily who likes books and wants to be a veterinarian. I'm Lily the foster care success story, and I don't want that to be who I am. Marcus felt something in his chest tighten. He'd been so focused on the program, on helping other children, that he hadn't considered whether Lily's privacy or sense of self was being compromised by the public nature of their story. What do you need from me? He asked. I need to not be part of the program's public narrative anymore, Lily said. I need you to stop using my story, or at least stop making it the centerpiece of what you do. I need you to understand that I'm separate from your mission, that I'm a person with my own life that doesn't belong to the cause, even if it started that way. It was one of the hardest conversations Marcus had ever had, because Lily was right. He'd been so committed to helping other children through publicly sharing their story that he hadn't stopped to ask whether Lily wanted her private pain to be public testimony. You're right, Marcus said. I'm sorry. I should have asked. I should have protected your privacy more carefully. What do you need me to do? Stop talking about me specifically, Lily said. You can talk about your experience. You can talk about what you learned, but don't put me in it. Don't use my name. Don't make my trauma the marketing tool for the program." The next day, Marcus wrote a letter to Rebecca requesting that all direct references to Lily be removed from program materials. He contacted the news organization that had aired his interview and requested that the recorded segment be taken down. He understood now something he'd been resisting, that his responsibility to Lily superseded his commitment to the program, that protecting her well-being was more important than expanding reach through compelling stories. Rebecca accepted his request without argument. "This is actually good," Rebecca said. "We've been overly reliant on your story anyway. The program should stand on its merits, not on the narrative of one rescue." And it does. We have data. We have outcomes. We don't need the emotional story to justify the work. By the new year, Marcus had reshaped his relationship to the program. He was still involved, but peripherally. He mentored Lily. He consulted occasionally on difficult cases. He maintained his friendship with James and the other mentors. But he was no longer the public face. He was no longer traveling or training or performing his transformation for audiences. What he was doing instead was living his life, fully, without apology, without the constant sense that he needed to justify his existence by helping others. He woke early, drank coffee on his porch, worked on the ranch. He had quiet evenings. He read books he wanted to read. He allowed himself moments of boredom and solitude, and when Lily came to visit, they didn't talk about the program. They talked about her life, about the books she was reading, the veterinary science class she was taking, the boys she kind of liked but wasn't sure how to talk to. They were just Marcus and Lily, having a relationship that belonged to them alone. One evening in early spring, as the mountains began to shed their snow, Lily said something that seemed to encapsulate everything they'd both learned. "I think I understand now why you were alone for so long," she said. "It's not because you didn't have anything to offer. It's because people are complicated. Connection is complicated. And sometimes it's easier to just be alone than to navigate all that mess." "That's true," Marcus said. But the mess is actually what makes it real," Lily said. "The complexity, the disappointment, the misunderstanding, that's what makes it worth doing." Marcus looked at this young woman who'd knocked on his door asking for shelter, who'd transformed his life, who taught him more about courage than anyone he'd ever known. And he realized that the story he thought had ended 3 years ago was actually still unfolding. It had just become quieter, less dramatic, more real. The greatest gift of Lily's arrival wasn't the redemption or the purpose or the transformation. It was this: the knowledge that a single act of compassion could ripple outward in ways you couldn't predict or control. But that true responsibility meant protecting that person first, before the mission, before the cause, before the narrative. That real love looked like stepping back when stepping back was what someone needed. That home wasn't a place or even a program. It was simply the willingness to show up consistently for someone else's well-being, even when it meant sacrificing your own visibility. 5 years after Lily knocked on Marcus's truck. The story isn't about dramatic transformation anymore. It's about what happens after the cameras leave and the program expands and life settles into its actual shape. It's about the quiet heroism of showing up consistently without fanfare. Marcus is 52 now. His hair has more gray than it did 5 years ago. His hands are scarred from ranch work, but also from the work of caring, holding Lily's hand during difficult conversations, teaching James to read mentorship reports, sitting with parents in crisis. He still runs the ranch, still wakes before dawn, still drinks coffee on his porch watching the mountains. But the silence that surrounds him now is chosen rather than imposed. Lily is 18. She's in her first year of veterinary science at the University of Wyoming. She visits the ranch most weekends, though not out of obligation. She comes because she wants to, because the relationship between them has moved into genuine friendship alongside the mentorship. They talk about her boyfriend, her difficult organic chemistry class, her plans for a future that has nothing to do with foster care or trauma. She's whole in a way that wasn't possible 5 years ago. Not because the trauma disappeared, but because she learned to integrate it, to be more than what happened to her. Sandra is the director of human resources for a regional healthcare company. She and Thomas got married last spring in a small ceremony at the ranch. David Mercer's sentence is being served in a federal penitentiary in Nevada. The appeals are exhausted. He's no longer a threat, except in the ways that memory can threaten. In nightmares, in triggers, in the occasional moment when Lily has to consciously choose not to let his shadow define her present. The Millbrook Stability Initiative now operates in 14 counties across 3 states. Rebecca Chen directs it from an office in the state capital. James supervises mentors. The program has helped over 400 children. Most of them are still in the system. Some have been reunified with family. Some are aging out into independence. The work continues quietly, without the public attention that once surrounded it. Marcus received recognition last year, an award from a national child welfare organization. They wanted him to speak at their annual conference. He declined. He sent a letter instead, explaining that he wasn't comfortable being the public face of something that belonged to many people. Rebecca accepted the award in his stead. When she called to tell him, she said something that seemed to encapsulate his entire journey. You taught everyone that transformation happens in private moments, not public ones. It was important that someone model that by refusing the spotlight. The ranch has expanded slightly, not in size but in function. Sandra and Thomas have talked about building a small cabin on the property, somewhere to host family gatherings, somewhere that feels like continuity. Marcus has agreed, provided the land remains mostly untouched. Provided there's still space for solitude. There's a photograph on Marcus's desk, the only photograph in the house. It was taken 6 months ago at Lily's high school graduation. She's wearing her cap and gown, holding her diploma. Marcus stands beside her, his arm around her shoulders. They're both smiling, both real smiles, the kind that come from genuine happiness rather than performance. That photograph represents something Marcus didn't know he was searching for when Lily first asked for shelter. Evidence that transformation isn't about becoming someone different. It's about learning to live with who you actually are, broken pieces and all. What Marcus has learned over 5 years of showing up consistently is that home isn't necessarily a place. It's the knowledge that someone chose to stay. That someone sees you clearly and decides you're worth the complication. That vulnerability isn't weakness, but the doorway to connection. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is step back. That silence can be peaceful rather than punishing. That opening your coat to shelter a child can fundamentally alter the trajectory of both your lives. He still thinks about the night Lily appeared, about how close he came to saying no. About how his first instinct was to direct her toward authority figures, toward the system, toward anywhere but his own vulnerability. He thinks about all the moments where he could have pulled back, maintained his isolation, protected himself from the risk of caring. He's glad he didn't. These days, when people ask Marcus about his work with the mentorship program, he doesn't talk about his role. He talks about the concept. He talks about how children thrive when they have consistent, caring adults in their lives. He talks about how broken people can help other broken people because they understand the landscape of hurt. He talks about how the greatest interventions are often the simplest, showing up, paying attention, believing that change is possible, but mostly he just lives his life. He works the ranch. He spends time with Lily when she comes home. He has coffee with James on Saturday mornings. He maintains the boundaries that keep him functional. He says no when he needs to. He says yes when something matters. On the 5-year anniversary of the night Lily arrived, Marcus stands on the same ridge where he'd parked during his first crisis, thinking about what it meant to help her. The view hasn't changed. The mountains are still magnificent. The valley still spreads out beneath him, holding the small town where everything shifted. He thinks about the girl who asked if she could hide under his coat. He thinks about how that single moment of opening had cascaded into friendships and programs and a fundamental reshaping of how he understood his place in the world. He thinks about how sometimes the most transformative moments come from the simplest acts, from saying yes, from staying present, from recognizing that the person in front of you matters more than your fear. As the sun drops behind the peaks, Marcus turns back toward the ranch, toward the house that's no longer silent, toward the life he built by refusing to stay alone. And he understands, finally and completely, what the old rancher who kept to himself had been running from all those years. Not connection itself, just the terror of believing he might actually deserve it. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.